In the quiet suburbs of a small town where mornings were usually calm and predictable, Maya Johnson began her day like any other. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of freshly cut grass as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon. Maya, a tall and athletic woman with deep brown skin and an aura of quiet confidence, stepped out of her house dressed in her usual running gear, black leggings, a moisture-wicking tank top, and sturdy sneakers. She had always loved running. It wasn't just about staying fit, it was her way of finding peace amidst life's chaos. Maya lived alone in a modest home she'd bought 5 years ago after retiring from the military. To her neighbors, she was simply the nice lady who runs every morning. Few knew that beneath her unassuming exterior lay the skills and experience of someone extraordinary, a former Navy SEAL, trained in combat, strategy, and survival. Her career had taken her to some of the most dangerous places on Earth, but, now at 36, Maya preferred the simplicity of civilian life. Or so she thought. As she stretched by her front door, Maya noticed a police cruiser slowly rolling down the street. At first, she paid it no mind. Police patrols were common in this neighborhood, especially during early hours when most people were still asleep, but something felt off today. The car slowed almost imperceptibly as it passed her driveway, its occupants staring intently. Maya shrugged it off, assuming they were probably checking for stray dogs or looking for a missing child. After all, she was just another resident going about her routine. She started jogging, her pace steady and rhythmic as she moved along the sidewalk. The streets were empty except for the occasional chirping bird or rustling leaves. As she rounded a corner onto Maple Street, the same police cruiser reappeared in her peripheral vision. This time it stopped completely, pulling up alongside her. 2 officers stepped out, their expressions stern and unwelcoming. One of them, a burly man with a thick mustache, approached her while the other lingered near the car, hand resting casually on his holster. "Excuse me, ma'am," the officer said gruffly. "Can we have a word?" Maya slowed to a stop, wiping sweat from her brow. She offered a polite smile, though her instincts told her to stay alert. "Of course, officer. Is everything okay?" The man ignored her question, instead narrowing his eyes suspiciously. "What are you doing around here?" Someone reported seeing a suspicious person in the area. Maya blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Suspicious? Her? She glanced around, taking in the familiar surroundings. The neatly trimmed lawns, the white picket fences, the houses she'd jogged past countless times before. "I live here," she replied calmly, pointing toward her street. "I'm just out for my morning run." But the officer didn't seem convinced. He exchanged a glance with his partner, then turned back to Maya. "Do you have ID on you?" he demanded. Maya shook her head. "No, I don't carry ID when I go running, but if you'd like, I can show you where I live. It's just a few blocks away." The second officer scoffed loudly, muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, "Yeah, right." Maya's jaw tightened, but she forced herself to remain composed. She'd dealt with far worse situations during her time in the military. Still, there was something deeply unsettling about being treated like a criminal in her own neighborhood. Without warning, the first officer stepped closer, reaching for her arm. "Come with us," he ordered. "We need to verify your story." Maya instinctively pulled back, her voice firm but controlled. "I haven't done anything wrong. You're making a mistake." But the officer wasn't listening. His grip tightened around her wrist, yanking her forward. Pain shot through her arm, but Maya refused to cry out. Instead, she locked eyes with him, her gaze sharp and unwavering. For a split second, the officer hesitated, perhaps sensing that this woman wasn't someone to be underestimated. But pride, or prejudice, won out, and he shoved her roughly against a nearby fence. "What's going on here?" a voice called. "Out." A neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, stood on her porch, clutching her robe tightly around her. She'd been watching the scene unfold from her window and couldn't believe what she was seeing. Other curtains twitched as more residents peeked outside, curious about the commotion. The officers ignored the growing audience, focusing instead on subduing Maya. They slapped handcuffs on her wrists, ignoring her protests and pleas for reason. "You'll get your chance to explain at the station," one of them barked, shoving her into the back seat of the cruiser. As the car sped away, Maya stared out the window, her mind racing. She could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to let fear take over. Years of training had taught her how to stay calm under pressure, how to think strategically even in the face of adversity. And as the reality of what had just happened sank in, one thing became crystal clear. These men had made a grave error. Not because she was innocent, that much was obvious, but because they had no idea who they were dealing with. For now, Maya decided to play along. She would wait, observe, and gather information. These officers might think they had the upper hand, but little did they know, they were about to learn a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The police cruiser rattled as it sped through the streets, its tires screeching around corners. Maya sat silently in the back seat, her hands cuffed behind her, but her mind was anything but still. She replayed the events of the past few minutes, in her head, analyzing every detail. The officers' tone, their body language, the way they ignored her explanations. It wasn't just racism. It was arrogance, a toxic mix of authority and prejudice that clouded their judgment. But Maya knew, better than to let anger consume her. She had been trained to remain calm under pressure, to think clearly even when the odds seemed stacked against her. As the car pulled into the station's parking lot, Maya glanced out the window. The building looked ordinary enough. A brick structure with faded paint and flickering fluorescent lights. But Maya recognized it for what it truly was. A battleground. Her years in the Navy SEALs had taught her how to navigate hostile environments, how to turn any situation to her advantage. She reminded herself of one crucial truth. These officers had no idea who she really was. To them, she was just another suspect, someone they could intimidate without consequence. That ignorance would be their downfall. Inside the station, Maya was led to an interrogation room. The space was cramped and sterile, with peeling wallpaper and a single metal table bolted to the floor. A harsh overhead light buzzed incessantly, casting harsh shadows across the room. One of the officers who had arrested her entered shortly after, slamming a file folder onto the table. His face was red, his jaw clenched tightly. "All right," he barked, leaning forward aggressively. "Let's hear your story." Maya didn't flinch. Instead, she met his gaze steadily, her expression unreadable. "My name is Maya Johnson," she began calmly. "I live at 1428 Maple Street. I was out for my morning run when you stopped me. You already know this because I told you before." The officer sneered, clearly unimpressed. "That's not good enough. We need proof. Do you have ID, witnesses? Anything to back up your claims?" Maya shook her head slightly. "I don't carry ID when I run, but if you'd like, you can call my neighbors or check my address yourself. My house isn't far from where you picked me up." The officer scoffed, pacing the room like a predator circling its prey. "You expect us to believe you just happened to be jogging in a neighborhood where someone reported a suspicious person? Convenient, don't you think?" Maya tilted her head slightly, her voice steady but laced with steel. "Convenient for whom? For me? Or for you, since it gives you an excuse to harass me without cause?" The comment hit a nerve. The officer slammed his fist on the table, causing it to rattle. "Watch your mouth," he snapped. "You're in serious trouble here. Trespassing, resisting arrest. Do you want to add assaulting an officer to the list?" Maya raised an eyebrow, her composure unshaken. "Assaulting an officer? Really? From what I recall, I was the one being shoved around. If anyone should be worried about charges, it's you." For a moment, silence filled the room. The officer glared at her, his chest heaving with barely contained rage. He opened his mouth to retort, but stopped himself, realizing he was losing control of the situation. Maya wasn't acting like other suspects he'd interrogated. She wasn't afraid, wasn't pleading, wasn't breaking down. Instead, she was challenging him, turning his own tactics against him, and it infuriated him. Unbeknownst to the officers, Maya had already set her plan into motion. Before leaving home that morning, she had activated a tracking app on her phone, a habit left over from her days in the military. The app allowed her best friend Marcus to monitor her location in real time. When the police cruiser pulled away from the scene, Marcus received an alert almost immediately. At first, he assumed it was a glitch, but when the notification persisted, showing Maya heading toward the police station, Marcus sprang into action. Marcus. Carter was everything Maya wasn't. Loud, brash, and unapologetically outspoken. They had served together in the Navy SEALs, forming a bond stronger than family. After retiring, Marcus had become a private investigator, using his skills to help those who couldn't fight for themselves. When he saw Maya's location update, his blood ran cold. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Grabbing his phone, Marcus dialed Maya's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again, then sent a text. "Are you okay?" No response. Panic bubbled inside him, but he forced himself to stay focused. He called a mutual friend, Jamal, another former SEAL, and explained the situation. Within minutes, Jamal was on board, ready to assist however needed. While Marcus worked the phones, reaching out to contacts within the military community, Jamal drove to the police station. He parked a block away, careful not to draw attention. Using binoculars, he scoped out the building, noting the number of patrol cars in the lot and the officers coming and going. Everything about the scene screamed trouble. Back in the interrogation room, Maya continued her verbal chess match with the officer. She asked politely if she could make a phone call, citing her constitutional rights. The officer hesitated, unsure whether to grant her request. Finally, he relented, handing over a landline phone. Maya dialed Marcus's number, keeping her tone casual as she spoke. "Hey, it's me," she said softly. "I'm at the station. Things got complicated." Marcus listened intently, piecing together the details. "Don't worry," he assured her. "We're handling it. Just stay cool." "All right?" Maya nodded, though the officer couldn't see her. "I will," she replied. Then, lowering her voice, she added, "And Marcus, make sure everyone knows exactly who I am." By now, word of Maya's arrest had begun to spread. Neighbors who had witnessed the altercation earlier that morning started posting on social media, sharing videos and photos they had taken. Hashtags like "Tying Justice for Maya" and "Black Lives Matter" began trending locally, drawing attention from activists and journalists alike. News vans arrived outside the station, their cameras rolling as reporters interviewed bystanders. The pressure mounted on law enforcement officials to explain why a seemingly innocent jogger had been detained. Inside the station, the chief of police watched the chaos unfold on TV monitors. His face turned pale as he realized the magnitude of the situation. "Who is this woman?" he demanded, turning to one of his subordinates. "She says she lives nearby." The subordinate stammered. "Claims she was out for a run." The chief rubbed his temples, feeling a migraine coming on. "Find out everything you can about her," he ordered, "and fast." Meanwhile, Marcus and Jamal worked tirelessly behind the scenes. They contacted influential figures within the military community, including high-ranking officers and veterans organizations, urging them to amplify Maya's story. By mid-afternoon, hashtags related to the incident were trending nationwide. Celebrities tweeted about it, politicians weighed in, and protests erupted outside the station. Signs read, "End police brutality and respect our heroes." Back in the interrogation room, Maya leaned back in her chair, a faint smile playing on her lips. She could feel the tide turning. These officers might have underestimated her, but they had no idea what they were up against. As the hours ticked by, Maya remained patient, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Because she knew one thing for certain: justice would come. Not just for her, but for everyone who deserved better. As the afternoon sun blazed outside, the tension inside the police station grew palpable. The chief of police, a middle-aged man with thinning hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, paced nervously in his office. On the TV monitors mounted on The wall news anchors spoke fervently about the growing outrage over Maya's arrest. Protesters chanted slogans outside, their voices echoing through the halls despite the closed doors and thick walls. The chief knew this was more than just a routine incident. It had spiraled into something far bigger, something that could tarnish the department's reputation for years to come. He picked up the phone and dialed the interrogation room. "What's going on with her?" he barked into the receiver. "Why hasn't she cracked yet?" The officer on the other end sounded flustered. "Sir, she's not like anyone we've dealt with before. She's calm, collected, almost too calm, and she keeps asking for proof of why she's being held." The chief slammed the phone down, frustration bubbling inside him. He turned to one of his deputies standing nearby. "Get me everything you can find on this woman. Social media, employment, records, military service, and if she sneezed last week, I want to know about it." Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, Maya sat quietly, her demeanor unchanged. She had spent hours locked in a verbal tug-of-war with the officers, deflecting their accusations and turning their questions back on them. Every time they tried to intimidate her, she responded with logic and precision, forcing them to justify their actions. Her patience was wearing them down, and she could see cracks forming in their confidence. When the door creaked open again, Maya didn't look up immediately. Instead, she waited until the new arrival, a tall, wiry man in a crisp uniform, pulled out a chair and sat across from her. His badge identified him as Lieutenant Harris, and his expression suggested he was trying hard to appear authoritative. But Maya noticed the subtle signs of unease, the slight tremor in his hands, the way he avoided making direct eye contact. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice clipped but less aggressive than the previous officers. "I understand there's been some confusion here. Let's clear things up, shall we?" Maya raised an eyebrow, feigning mild interest. "Confusion? That's an interesting choice of words. From where I'm sitting, it looks more like harassment." Lieutenant Harris ignored her comment and opened a folder on the table. Inside were printouts of social media posts, photos of Maya, jogging, and even screenshots of neighbors' complaints. "We received reports of a suspicious individual in your neighborhood," he explained. "Given the circumstances, my team acted accordingly." Maya leaned forward slightly, her voice steady but laced with sarcasm. "Suspicious? Because I'm black and running in broad daylight? Or because someone decided my presence didn't fit their idea of what's normal?" Harris shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "It's not about race," he insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "It's about ensuring public safety." "Public safety," Maya repeated slowly, letting the phrase hang in the air. "So tell me, Lieutenant, how exactly does arresting an unarmed jogger contribute to public safety? Did you ask yourself that question before you threw me against a fence and slapped cuffs on me?" Harris opened his mouth to respond but hesitated. Maya's words struck a nerve, exposing the glaring holes in their reasoning. He glanced at the folder again, flipping through its contents as if searching for answers. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Look, Miss Johnson, maybe there was a misunderstanding. If you cooperate—" "I have cooperated," Maya interrupted, her voice rising slightly for the first time. "I told you who I am, where I live, and what I was doing. What more do you want from me? An apology for existing?" Her words hit, like a punch, leaving Harris momentarily speechless. Outside, the protests grew louder, chants of "No justice, no peace," reverberating through the building. The lieutenant wiped sweat from his forehead, realizing the situation was slipping further out of control. He stood abruptly, muttering something about needing to consult with his superiors, and left the room. Back outside, Marcus and Jamal were orchestrating chaos with surgical precision. Marcus had contacted influential veterans groups, urging them to share Maya's story online. Within hours, hashtags like "Our Respect Our Heroes" and "Justice for Maya" were trending nationwide. Tweets poured in from retired SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marines, all vouching for Maya's character and demanding accountability. One particularly viral post read, "If you mess with one of us, you mess with all of us." Jamal, meanwhile, coordinated with local activists and community leaders. He reached out to civil rights organizations, ensuring they amplified Maya's case. Lawyers specializing in police misconduct offered their services pro bono, while journalists scrambled to dig deeper into the department's history of racial profiling. By late afternoon, the pressure on law enforcement officials was unbearable. Inside the station, the chief of police convened an emergency meeting with his top brass. "This is a PR nightmare," he muttered, pacing back and forth. "Every news outlet in the country is talking about this. We need to fix it. Now." One of his deputies suggested releasing a statement apologizing for the misunderstanding. Another proposed offering Maya compensation to avoid a lawsuit. But the chief shook his head. "It's too late for that. People want answers, not excuses." Just then, a young officer burst into the room clutching a file. "Sir, you need to see this," he said breathlessly. He handed over the documents, which included detailed information about Maya's background. The chief scanned the pages, his eyes widening as he processed what he was reading. She's a Navy SEAL?" he stammered, looking up at his team. "A decorated veteran." The room fell silent. No one spoke, each person grappling with the realization of how badly they had underestimated her. The chief sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "We're screwed," he muttered under his breath. Word of Maya's identity spread quickly among the officers involved in her arrest. Some began questioning whether they had made a colossal mistake. Others clung to denial, insisting they had followed proper protocol. But the truth was undeniable. They had arrested a highly trained, highly respected former Navy SEAL without cause, and now the entire world knew it. By evening, the protests outside the station had swelled into a massive demonstration. Hundreds of people gathered, holding signs and chanting slogans. Reporters interviewed protesters, many of whom shared stories of their own encounters with police brutality. Social media buzzed with calls for reform, with Maya's case serving as a rallying cry for change. Inside the interrogation room, Maya remained unfazed by the commotion. She knew the tide was turning, but she also knew better than to celebrate prematurely. When the door opened once more, she expected another officer or perhaps even the chief himself. But instead, a familiar face appeared. Mrs. Henderson, the neighbor who had witnessed her arrest earlier that morning. "I brought you some water," Mrs. Henderson said softly, placing a bottle on the table. Her hands trembled slightly and her eyes glistened with tears. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Maya. You didn't deserve any of this." Maya smiled faintly, touched by the older woman's kindness. "Thank you," she replied. "But don't apologize. This isn't your fault." Mrs. Henderson nodded, wiping her eyes. "Still, I should have done more. I should have stepped in when those officers were roughing you up." I froze. Maya leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "You're here now, and that means something. Don't let fear stop you from speaking up next time. That's how we make things better." As Mrs. Henderson left the room, Maya felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had ever been treated unfairly because of the color of their skin. It was about holding those in power accountable and ensuring that no one else had to endure what she had gone through that day. The door opened again, and this time the chief of police entered, his shoulders slumped and his face pale. He carried a single sheet of paper in his hand and placed it on the table in front of Maya. "Ms. Johnson," he began, his voice trembling. "On behalf of the department, I'd like to offer our sincerest apologies. There's been a grave misunderstanding." Maya studied him carefully, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, finally, she broke the silence. "An apology is a start," she said calmly. "But it's not enough. Not for me, and certainly not for everyone else who suffered because of your department's failures. So here's what's going to happen." The chief of police shifted uncomfortably under Maya's piercing gaze. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, but there was an unmistakable edge to her words, an authority that commanded respect. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as she continued. "You're going to release me immediately without any charges, and you're going to issue a public statement acknowledging your department's mistake. The chief nodded hastily, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. Of course, Ms. Johnson, we'll do that right away. Anything else? Maya tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a faint smile. Yes, you're also going to release the body cam footage from the officers who arrested me. Unedited, no spin, no excuses. Let the public see exactly what happened. The chief hesitated, glancing nervously at the folder in his hand. Releasing the footage would be admitting fault, and not just for this incident, but for years of unchecked behavior within the department. But Maya's unwavering stare left him with little room to maneuver. We'll consider it, he stammered. Consider it? Maya repeated, her voice sharp enough to make him flinch. Let me be clear, Chief. If that footage isn't released by tomorrow morning, I'll make sure every news outlet in the country gets access to it, along with my entire military record and every commendation I've ever received. Trust me, you don't want to test me on this. The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unrelenting. The chief swallowed hard, nodding again. Understood. It'll be done. Maya leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. Good. Now, here's the final piece. You're going to suspend the officers involved pending a full investigation. And if I find out anyone tried to cover for them, I'll take this fight all the way to Congress. Do we have a deal? For a moment, the chief said nothing. He knew he had no choice but to comply. This wasn't just a woman sitting across from him. It was a force of nature, someone who had faced far greater challenges than anything he could throw at her. Finally, he extended his hand. Deal. Maya didn't shake it. Instead, she stood, up brushing imaginary dust off her clothes. Don't thank me, she said coolly. Thank yourself for finally doing the right thing. For once. As Maya walked out of the interrogation room, escorted by a young officer who seemed too intimidated to meet her eyes, she felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her. Relief, anger, determination, they all coexisted in a chaotic dance. Outside, the protests were still raging, but when Maya stepped into view, the crowd erupted into cheers. People clapped, whistled, and chanted her name, holding up signs that read, "Hero," and "Justice served." Cameras flashed as reporters rushed toward her, microphones thrust forward like weapons. But Maya didn't stop. She simply raised a hand, signaling for silence. When the noise died down, she addressed the crowd. I didn't ask for this, she began, her voice steady and clear despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I didn't wake up this morning thinking I'd end up here. All I wanted was to go for a run, to enjoy the fresh air and clear my mind. But instead I was treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin. Her words resonated deeply with the crowd, many of whom nodded in agreement. Tears streamed down some faces, while others clenched their fists in quiet rage. Maya paused, letting the weight of her statement sink in before continuing. What happened to me today isn't unique. It happens every single day to Black men, women, and children across this country, to Indigenous people, to Latinos, to Asians, to anyone who doesn't fit the narrow definition of normal in the eyes of those in power. That's why we can't stop fighting, not until real change happens. The crowd erupted again, this time with renewed energy. Protesters chanted louder, their voices echoing through the streets. Maya took a step back, allowing the moment to breathe. She knew this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. The battle for justice was far from over, but tonight they had won a small victory. And sometimes small victories were enough to keep hope alive. Back inside the station, chaos reigned. The chief called an emergency press conference, flanked by his deputies and legal advisors. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he read from a prepared statement. Earlier today, our department made a grave error in judgment, he admitted, his voice cracking under the weight of scrutiny. An innocent woman, a decorated veteran, was wrongfully detained due to a misunderstanding. For that, we offer our sincerest apologies. Reporters fired questions at him, their pens scribbling furiously as cameras rolled. Will the officers involved face consequences? One shouted. How will you prevent this from happening again? Another demanded. The chief fumbled for answers, clearly unprepared for the onslaught. Behind the scenes, His team scrambled to draft policies aimed at addressing racial profiling and improving accountability. They knew these measures wouldn't erase decades of mistrust, but they hoped they might quell the growing outrage, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, Marcus and Jamal celebrated their role in turning the tide. Back at Marcus's apartment, they watched the live coverage on TV, grinning from ear to ear. "You see that?" Marcus exclaimed, pointing at the screen. "That's how you handle business." Maya didn't even break a sweat. Jamal chuckled, shaking his head in admiration. "She's always been like that. Calm on the outside, fire on the inside. Those cops never stood a chance." Their laughter faded as reality set in. While they were thrilled about the outcome, they knew the fight was far from over. Racial injustice wasn't something that could be solved overnight. It required sustained effort, relentless advocacy, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. As former SEALs, they understood the importance of teamwork and resilience, and they vowed to stand by Maya's side no matter what came next. That night, Maya returned home to find her phone flooded with messages. Friends, family, strangers, all reaching out to express support, gratitude, and solidarity. Some shared stories of their own experiences with discrimination, while others thanked her for standing up and speaking out. One message stood out among the rest. It was from a young girl named Aliyah, who wrote, "Thank you for showing me that I can be strong no matter what anyone says. You're my hero." Maya smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotion. She replied briefly, encouraging Aliyah to keep believing in herself. Then she turned off her phone and sat quietly in her living room, staring out the window at the darkened street. The events of the day replayed in her mind like a movie, each frame etched with vivid detail. She thought about the officers who had arrested her, the neighbors who had witnessed the altercation, the protesters who had rallied outside the station. Each person played a part in the larger narrative, whether they realized it or not. Despite the exhaustion weighing her down, Maya felt a spark of determination ignite within her. This wasn't just her story. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, that they weren't good enough, that their lives didn't matter, and she refused to let it end here. The next morning, the body cam footage was released as promised. Social media exploded with reactions, the video racking up millions of views within hours. Viewers were horrified by the officers' aggression, outraged by their disregard for Maya's rights, and inspired by her composure in the face of injustice. Hashtags like #NarnAccountabilityNow and #EndRacism trended globally, sparking conversations about systemic racism and police reform. Lawmakers weighed in, calling for investigations and policy changes. Activists organized rallies in cities across the country, using Maya's case as a catalyst for broader discussions about equality and justice. Schools incorporated her story into lesson plans, teaching students about courage, resilience, and the power of standing up for what's right. Through it all, Maya remained grounded. She declined lucrative offers from talk shows and book deals, choosing instead to focus on grassroots efforts to create meaningful change. She partnered with civil rights organizations, spoke at community events, and mentored young people eager to make a difference. Her message was simple yet profound. Change starts with us. It starts with refusing to stay silent, refusing to accept the status quo. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. And so, Maya's journey continued, not as a victim, but as a leader, a symbol of strength, a beacon of hope. Weeks turned into months, and the ripple effects of Maya's arrest continued to spread far beyond her quiet suburban neighborhood. The body cam footage had ignited a firestorm of outrage, forcing people across the nation, and even around the EU world, to confront uncomfortable truths about systemic racism and police brutality. What started as a single incident involving one black woman jogging through her own community became a rallying cry for justice, equality, and accountability. The officers involved in Maya's arrest were suspended without pay pending an internal investigation. But that wasn't enough for many activists and community leaders who demanded more than just temporary consequences. Protests persisted outside the police station, with demonstrators chanting slogans like, "Fire the racists" and No badges for bigots. Local politicians joined the chorus, calling for immediate termination of the officer's employment and criminal charges if warranted. The pressure mounted until the department had no choice but to act decisively. Meanwhile, Maya threw herself into advocacy work. She founded an organization called Justice in Motion, dedicated to addressing racial profiling, promoting cultural sensitivity training for law enforcement, and supporting victims of police misconduct. Her military background gave her credibility, while her personal experience made her relatable. People listened when she spoke, not because she shouted the loudest, but because her words carried weight. She traveled across the country, delivering speeches at town halls, universities, and conferences, always emphasizing the importance of unity and action. One evening, Maya stood on stage at a packed auditorium in downtown Chicago. The audience was diverse, young and old, black, white, Latino, Asian, all united by a shared desire for change. Maya adjusted the microphone, her presence commanding yet approachable. "When I woke up that morning," she began, her voice steady and calm. "I didn't plan to become an activist. I didn't plan to have my life turned upside down. All I wanted was to go for a run." She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle over the crowd. "But sometimes, life doesn't give us a choice. Sometimes we're forced to stand up, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else who's been silenced, dismissed, or mistreated. And when that moment comes, we have two options. We can stay quiet and let fear win, or we can rise up and demand better." The room erupted in applause, but Maya raised a hand to quiet the crowd. "This fight isn't easy," she continued. "It's messy, exhausting, and often thankless. There will be days when it feels like nothing is changing, like the system is too big, too broken to fix. But I'm here to tell you, it's worth it. Every march, every petition, every difficult conversation brings us one step closer to a world where everyone is treated equally. And trust me, we're getting there." Her speech ended with a standing ovation, the energy in the room electric. Afterward, dozens of attendees lined up to speak with her, sharing their stories and asking for advice. A teenage boy named Marcus approached hesitantly, clutching a notebook filled with sketches of protest signs and slogans. "Ms. Johnson," he said shyly, "I want to make a difference, but I don't know where to start." Maya smiled warmly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Start small," she replied. "Talk to your friends, your teachers, your family. Educate yourself about the issues. Use your voice, whether it's through art, writing, or organizing events. Change begins with individuals like you, Marcus. Don't underestimate the power of one person." As the weeks went by, Justice in Motion gained momentum. Volunteers poured in from all walks of life, eager to contribute their skills and time. Lawyers offered pro bono services to help victims navigate legal battles. Artists created murals and installations honoring those who had lost their lives to police violence. Teachers incorporated anti-racism lessons into their curriculums, ensuring the next generation grew up aware of these critical issues. But Maya knew real progress required systemic change, not just grassroots efforts. She collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at increasing transparency within law enforcement agencies. Body cameras became mandatory in several states, and departments were required to release footage promptly after incidents occurred. De-escalation training programs replaced outdated tactics that prioritized aggression over dialogue. While these changes weren't perfect, they marked important steps forward. Not everyone supported Maya's efforts, however. Critics accused her of stirring up trouble, claiming she was exploiting her arrest for fame. Online trolls flooded social media with hateful comments, questioning everything from her character to her motives. Some even dug up old photos and videos attempting to discredit her. But Maya refused to engage. Instead, she focused on the positive impact she was making, knowing that hate would never derail her mission. Back in her hometown, tensions simmered between residents and the police department. Though reforms were underway, trust remained fragile. To bridge the gap, Maya organized a series of community forums where citizens could voice their concerns directly to officers. At first, attendance was sparse, with many people skeptical of whether anything meaningful would come from the meetings. But over time, more people showed up, some cautiously optimistic, others determined to hold authorities accountable. During one forum, a young mother named Lisa recounted how her teenage son had been stopped and frisked simply for walking home from school. Her voice trembled as she described the fear and humiliation he felt, tears streaming down her cheeks. Across the room, a veteran officer named Officer Daniels listened intently, his expression somber. When it was his turn to speak, he admitted, "I've been part of this department for 20 years, and I'll be honest, I've made mistakes. I've judged people based on stereotypes instead of facts. But hearing stories like yours makes me realize how much damage that causes. I'm committed to doing better starting today." His admission sparked a candid conversation about implicit bias and the need for mutual understanding. For the first time, residents and officers sat side by side, listening to each other's perspectives without judgment. It wasn't a magical solution, but it was a start, a foundation upon which healing could begin. Despite the progress, Maya faced moments of doubt. Late at night, when the house was silent and the weight of responsibility pressed down on her, she wondered if she was doing enough. Was she reaching the right people? Were her efforts truly making a difference? On particularly tough days, she called Marcus, who always reminded her of one simple truth. "You're planting seeds, Maya. You might not see them grow overnight, but they're growing. Trust the process." And so, Maya kept moving forward, fueled by hope and determination. She celebrated small victories, a teenager inspired to join the movement, a policy change implemented in a local precinct, a heartfelt letter from someone touched by her story. Each triumph reinforced her belief that change was possible, even if it took time. One day, while scrolling through social media, Maya stumbled upon a video posted by Aaliyah, the young girl who had written to her months earlier. In the clip, Aaliyah stood in front of her school auditorium, leading a presentation about racial justice. Behind her was a poster bearing Maya's face alongside the words, "Courage inspires courage." As Aaliyah spoke passionately about equality and resilience, Maya felt a lump form in her throat. This was why she fought for moments like this, for futures like Aaliyah's. By the end of the year, Maya's influence had reached unprecedented heights. Time magazine named her one of its most influential people, praising her courage and leadership. Celebrities used their platforms to amplify her message, while corporations pledged millions to support anti-racism initiatives. Yet despite the accolades, Maya remained humble. She declined interviews with major networks, preferring to focus on the work rather than the spotlight. In private, she reflected on how far she'd come since that fateful morning jog. She thought about the officers who had underestimated her, the protesters who had rallied behind her, and the countless strangers whose lives had intersected with hers along the way. Each person played a role in shaping her journey, reminding her that no one fights alone. As the sun set over her backyard, casting golden hues across the sky, Maya laced up her running shoes once more. This time, there were no cruisers pulling up beside her, no handcuffs waiting to restrain her. Just the open road ahead, inviting her to keep moving forward. Because that's what heroes do, they run toward challenges, not away from them. And Maya Johnson was ready to keep running, for as long as it took. Years passed, and Maya Johnson's story became more than just a headline. It became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Her name was etched into history books alongside other trailblazers who had dared to challenge systems of oppression. Yet, despite the accolades and recognition, Maya remained grounded in her mission. She knew that true change wasn't measured by awards or media coverage. It was reflected in the lives touched, the minds opened, and the hearts transformed. By the time she stood on stage at the National Justice Summit 4 years later, Justice in Motion had grown into a global movement. The organization operated in over 30 countries, partnering with local activists, governments, and law enforcement agencies to promote equity and accountability. Its programs ranged from youth mentorship initiatives to policy reform campaigns, each designed to address the root causes of inequality. What started as a small effort born out of personal adversity had blossomed into a beacon of hope for millions. The summit took place in Washington, D.C., a city steeped in both history and controversy. Thousands of attendees filled the grand auditorium, their faces illuminated by the glow of digital screens displaying hashtags like Equality for All and Justice in Action. As Maya walked onto the stage, applause erupted, echoing through the cavernous space. She wore a simple navy blue suit, her posture upright but relaxed, a testament to years of discipline and purpose. "Thank you," she began, her voice warm yet commanding. "When I look out at this crowd today, I see people from every corner of the world, different backgrounds, different experiences, different dreams. But we share one thing in common, a belief that a better future is possible." She paused, scanning the audience before continuing. "I often think about that morning when my life changed forever. I didn't ask to be arrested. I didn't ask to become an activist. All I wanted was to go for a run, to feel the wind on my face and the ground beneath my feet. But sometimes life gives us challenges not because we seek them, but because they're meant to teach us something important." Maya went on to recount her journey, the early days of protests, the sleepless nights spent strategizing, the moments of doubt that tested her resolve. She spoke candidly about the obstacles she faced, from online harassment to political pushback, but emphasized how each setback only strengthened her determination. "Every battle leaves scars," she admitted. "But those scars remind us of how far we've come and how much further we can go." Her speech resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom nodded in agreement or wiped away tears. When she finished, the room erupted in a standing ovation, cheers ringing out like thunder. But Maya didn't linger on the applause. Instead, she stepped aside to introduce a panel of speakers, activists, scholars, and survivors of police brutality, all united by their commitment to justice. Among them was Aliyah, now a confident college student studying sociology. She shared her story of growing up in a neighborhood plagued by systemic racism, and how Maya's example inspired her to pursue a career advocating for marginalized communities. "Ms. Johnson taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear," Aliyah said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "It's the decision to act in spite of it. And that's what I want to do, act, because silence doesn't fix anything." As the summit drew to a close, Maya reflected on how interconnected everyone's stories were. Each person in the room carried their own struggles, victories, and hopes for the future. Together, they formed a tapestry of humanity, a reminder that no individual's fight existed in isolation. Change happened when people came together, pooling their strengths and supporting one another. Back home, Maya continued balancing advocacy work with her personal life. Though she cherished the progress made, she never forgot the individuals behind the statistics, the families torn apart by violence, the children robbed of parents, the communities left shattered. She visited prisons to speak with inmates wrongfully, convicted, attended memorial services for victims of police brutality, and mentored young activists eager to carry the torch. One weekend, while jogging through her neighborhood, Maya noticed a new mural painted on the side of a community center. It depicted her silhouette running, surrounded by words like courage, resilience, and hope. Beneath it read a quote attributed to her: "Change begins when we refuse to stay silent." Tears welled in her eyes as she realized the profound impact her actions had on others. This wasn't just her legacy, it belonged to everyone who believed in a brighter tomorrow. Despite her success, Maya remained humble. She declined lucrative book deals and movie offers, choosing instead to focus on grassroots efforts. "This isn't about me," she often said. "It's about all of us working together to create a world where everyone feels safe, valued, and respected." Her humility endeared her even more to those around her. Neighbors greeted her warmly, sharing updates about their lives and thanking her for inspiring them to take action. Even some former critics softened their stance, acknowledging the tangible improvements brought about by her initiatives. One retired officer, once skeptical of reform, approached her during a community event to express his gratitude. You've shown us that trust is earned, not demanded, he said, and I'm proud to say I've learned from you. As the years rolled on, Maya's influence extended beyond activism. Schools named scholarships after her, universities invited her to deliver commencement addresses, and museums included her story in exhibits celebrating civil rights milestones. Yet none of these honors mattered as much to her as seeing real-world change unfold. Police departments across the nation implemented reforms she championed, including mandatory bias training and independent oversight boards. Incidents of racial profiling decreased significantly, though challenges still remained. On her 40th birthday, Maya gathered with close friends and family for a quiet celebration. Marcus and Jamal teased her about being old, while Mrs. Henderson baked her favorite cake. Surrounded by laughter and love, Maya felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had weathered storms, faced down adversaries, and emerged stronger, not just for herself, but for countless others. That evening, as fireworks lit up the sky, Maya sat alone on her porch, reflecting on her journey. She thought about the officers who had underestimated her, the protesters who had rallied behind her, and the strangers whose lives intersected with hers along the way. Each person played a role in shaping her path, reminding her that no one fights alone. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would still be battles to fight, injustices to confront, and hearts to win over. But Maya knew she wasn't running this race alone anymore. Millions of voices joined hers, amplifying her message and carrying it forward. Together, they were building a future rooted in equality, dignity, and respect. As the last firework faded into darkness, Maya smiled softly. Tomorrow she would lace up her running shoes again, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Because heroes don't stop running. They keep moving forward, step by step, until the finish line is crossed. And Maya Johnson was determined to cross it, for herself, for her community, and for generations to come.